Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. I did say in the last video I probably wasn't going to do another video in midweek unless something happened. Something happened. Quite a few things have actually happened in the last, 48 hours or so. I almost did a video last night and I just felt that after everything that happened with Fabio Paratici's appeal, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to hold off. I always seem to do these videos and then something happens just afterwards, which may well be the case today again. But I thought I'll hold off, and lo and behold, early this morning, we got the club announcement that Fabio Paratici has resigned as the club's managing director of football, which came as a shock for absolutely no one, probably in the world, that ended up being the end game of all of this. If you weren't aware, Paratici's appeal against his original ban from the Italian Football Federation was being heard yesterday. Technically it was Wednesday it began, it was heard, and the verdict was delivered yesterday, which was that although Juventus did get various things, are going to have a retrial and stuff like that, Paratici, I think it was Agnelli and another couple of people involved, all had their appeals rejected. There are other aspects to it. I'm speaking to some colleagues out in Italy, and there are other aspects to it. There's other kind of routes of appeal, like technically he's appealing the FIFA extension of his ban globally. There's other elements, but it no longer is of Tottenham's concern because Fabio Paratici has taken matters into his own hands and has stepped away permanently this time, after his leave of absence. So here's the quick statement if you didn't see it this morning from the club. Yesterday, Fabio Paratici was unsuccessful with an appeal against his Italian Football Federation ban on certain football-related activities. FIFA ruled to extend the ban worldwide, and whilst there continues to be a dispute as to the scope and extent of the ban, the current worldwide ban prevents Fabio from fulfilling his duties as our managing director of football. Fabio has consequently taken the decision to resign from his position at the club with immediate effect to focus on his legal position in respect of the FIGC, which is the Football Federation of Italy, and FIFA rulings. Daniel Levy, chairman, and it's like, it's not even saying Daniel Levy said or anything like that, it's just very much, it's like, statement, Daniel Levy, chairman. This has been a stressful time for Fabio and his family. We want to ensure that we are allowed for due process to be followed. Fabio is a man who lives and breathes football. We wish him well. As outlined in our year-end results, we started several months ago to restructure our football operations, and last week announced the appointment of Scott Munn as Chief Football Officer to head up all the departments. We shall continue to strengthen our football functions over the coming months. Like I say, least shocking news ever in Tottenham Hotspur history, I think. I don't want to get deep into the Paratici stuff, but again, because you've heard me speak about it at length in the past, but I just can't believe. Well, I can believe, but it's still shocking that we've got to this stage, and despite everything that's gone on, and the fact that, I said this in the past, the investigations going on to what was happening at Juventus, and of course Paratici's alleged involvement in it. Obviously, he's now been handed that bill and that ban, and the appeal rejected as well. All of that investigation, the early stuff was going on for a few months before Spurs took him on board, and it doesn't say a lot about Spurs' ability to hire people. You can look at what he's done at Spurs, and people within Spurs may still say it was worth it. Mixed success. Certain things he's done well behind the scenes, certain things that haven't been particularly great. Same with the transfers. Some, like Benson, Kulusevski, Romero, have been good. Others you could maybe argue a little bit more mixed. And maybe they'll think, well, kind of what we got out of him before it all went a bit wrong was worth it. I don't know whether it was. Personally, I think it was just another kind of black eye for Spurs over their just the whole way the club is run and the whole way they make decisions over people coming in and the being blinded by this. It's almost like, oh, they've been at a big club. Look what they've done. We must have them. And it's just like, do you have to always do it that way? Can you not follow due diligence? Look, I know he's someone that Daniel Levy apparently had wanted for like half a decade beforehand, but still, it's just been another, let's be honest, monumental gaffe by Daniel Levy, the board, whoever thoroughly looked into that decision. Because, you know, like I say, all this stuff has been going on and we've been keeping an eye on it over the years. Since he joined in 2021, summer of 2021, it's been there bubbling away in the background. And now we've got to the position where Tottenham Hotspur's managing director of football could no longer manage or direct football. And he is out the door. And I tell you what, the Italian influence on Spurs is suddenly just like ebbing away, isn't it? It's only Christian Stellini and the coaching staff that kind of remain. Obviously, there's a couple of minds like Leonardo Gabbanini. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens to the whole structure, because Fabio Paratici has created this very cluttered structure within the club, which has got some very good people in it. You know, Andy Scolding, keep hearing really good things about him. He is head of football strategy, technically. Greta Steinson's came in and made an impact as well. And down the chain, there's various scouts and people that he's brought in that have done a good job. Although I think a lot of people are stepping on each other's toes because of the amount of people brought in. And yeah, we'll see. Obviously, Jeff Vettere came in and he went as a scout. That didn't particularly last very long. So yeah, we shall see what this the system in place and what comes next. Because the interesting thing for me is we're having a little discussion about this today, just before the press conference, the Stellini press conference, is what do you do now in terms of, do you push on with your managerial appointment and get that done and then bring in a director of football? Or do you make it a priority to get another director of football who will work under Scott Munn? But then there's twofold issues with that. One is, well, actually, no, it's both sides. One is that if you bring or wait to bring someone in like that, especially if they're in a job, you're likely not to get them working until July the 1st, like Paratici was. That puts back your managerial search to way into the summer, almost into pre-season time. Although, yes, Fabio Paratici was working before his official start date. You've got that element to it. The other element is, if you're from the flip side, if it actually works at different levels of this structure. So if you appoint a manager and then a director of football, you're essentially saying to the director of football, well, yeah, he isn't your guy, but you're going to have to work with him. Then you've got the knock-on effect of that, of Scott Munn coming in July the 1st as chief football officer. Technically, are you picking his director of football for him? It's like this massive chain of people working with people they might not have signed off on. It's Spurs, so it's a mess. It's like, only Tottenham Hotspur could have no permanent manager of the men's team, no permanent manager of the women's team, no managing director of football, a star player in the last 12 months of his contract, and obviously waiting for this new man at the top, or Daniel Levy's number 2, and Scott Munn still to come in. It's a and on top of all of that, we rocked up at the press conference today and there'd been a massive power cut. And even nothing in Hotspur Way was working. Oh, it was honestly, you could not make it up what's happening right now at that football club. But yeah, I find that a really fascinating thing now. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes up in the weeks ahead. Like I say, we were really kind of discussing, trying to think, how do you do it? Because I think there is a need to get that new manager in as quickly as possible once this season is finished, if that's the way you're going to go with it. But then, like I say, you are then bringing in a director of football to then work with a manager they have not appointed. And that's not really how that system is meant to work. Yeah. I'm intrigued to see kind of how this all how this all kind of plays out, really. There's another scenario. There is another scenario that they promote from within, and Greta Steinson maybe steps up, as does Andy Scolding. I mean, they've been taking on Paratici's duty since he started his leave of absence anyway, unless they do that. Which is a jump for both men. Obviously, Greta Steinson was at Everton, but I think it was Marcel Brands was technically the sporting director of football type. And then Andy Scolding was chief scout at Rangers, wasn't he, before he came to Spurs. So it would be a big step for both of them. But then I guess Steve Hitchen did that in the past, was chief scout, I think, originally. And then he stepped up to become, I think it was called technical performance director towards the end, which was essentially a sporting director. And he ended up working quite well with Poch. But I don't know. I don't know which way this is going to go. It's mad. It's absolutely madness. And I mean, obviously, you're looking at all the managerial stuff, and there's so much going on there right now. And it's just having Chelsea in the market and being so much more proactive than Tottenham are is fascinating to watch the way they're doing it, because I think everyone probably is desperate just for Chelsea to appoint their manager. And then that allows Spurs to just kind of not have a free run, because there's other clubs that are going to be in the mix, I think, in the weeks ahead. But it does let that settle down a bit. Because let's be honest, Chelsea, despite the chaos that is there, because of the power and the money involved at Chelsea, they are a more attractive proposition for a lot of managers. Of course they are. So you are kind of as if to saying, like, okay, pick who you want, and then we'll see what we're going to do, which is the wrong way to do it. I agree. I can hear people going, oh, no, that's not the way to do it. But kind of unfortunately, in reality, it is. And obviously, we've seen the news today that Julian Nagelsmann has apparently pulled out of the Chelsea race, which is an interesting one, because obviously he's someone of great interest to Spurs, and they've kind of looked at him twice in the past before. But just, I've never got the sense, or I haven't got the sense, certainly in recent weeks, of anyone I've spoken to that knows him or has been in on the situation of having that sense that he's particularly interested in the Spurs job right now. Whether that changes or not as the weeks progress is another thing. But, as I said in the last video, Spurs' kind of idea is to not pick or not select anyone who is they're a fallback option for. And, if you're having to desperately convince someone to come and be your manager or head coach, it's not the greatest of starts to life and that relationship, is it? So yeah, be interesting to see what happens with Nagelsmann. But like I say, I wouldn't say that him, becoming no longer a part of the Chelsea race suddenly opens the door for Spurs. It makes it slightly easier in a sense, because you don't have that massive opposition to getting his signature. But yeah, I think some work would have to be done there if they were to pursue him as their main one. What I'm fascinated by, to be honest with you, is the whole aspect of Mauricio Pochettino and Chelsea. That's an interesting. I've used the word interesting about a million times. Is it already any interesting anymore? There's been so much going on. But Pochettino, it's incredible, really, to see the way that situation is developing. And we're at the stage where he seems to be a very viable candidate to become the next Chelsea manager. And if that were to happen, I'd be fascinated to see which ways the Spurs fans go with that. Because I think there will be maybe a large section of fans, we were talking about this again before the press conference, and we're all in kind of unanimous agreement that Spurs fans would find that very hard to accept, I think. A lot of them, if Pochettino decided to go to their local rivals. After all the talk about, unfinished business at Spurs and all of this, I think they would struggle with that. Because, regardless, because this is the key thing. This is the other side to the argument, is that Spurs have shown zero interest in reappointing Mauricio Pochettino. They haven't. I've been asking people around Poch and everything. And from what I understand, and also this is kind of coming from people within the club as well, there has been no contact made by anyone from Spurs with Mauricio Pochettino at this point. Just before I double checked before starting this video that there's been no kind of feelers put out to him from Spurs of whether he'd be interested in coming back, which is huge, really, when you see the calls for him to come back from the fans, the chants at the stadiums. So that's massive. And I think that we're at the stage where I think Pochettino himself, if Spurs did now decide they were going to go and try that option, which I still don't think they would anyway, it would be very much like, well, you're only doing that because the fans told you to. You don't really want me back. So with that in mind, I guess would some of the anger be pointed towards Tottenham, Daniel Levy, the board, over, well, why have you not gone for Mauricio Pochettino when he's the one we want, say, the fans? There's definitely an aspect to that. That's when I say I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated to see which way the fan base goes. I'm sure it'll be splintered as it always is anyway. But I'm intrigued to see which people just think, well, regardless of all of that, Pochettino should not be going to a local rival. He quite famously said, I'd never go to Barcelona or Arsenal. I think he said something about I'd rather be a farmer. But I think a lot of Spurs fans would lump Chelsea in that group as well of rivals. I know Mourinho eventually obviously came to Spurs when he said he'd never come to Spurs. But then as he said, well, they sacked me. And maybe Pochettino will say exactly the same thing about Spurs. But that's going to be, especially if he's a successor, that would be it's very difficult, I think, to watch. It'd be very difficult to see him for a lot of Spurs fans in that Stamford Bridge dugout. Personally, I think it would be a very similar-ish job to taking on the PSG job in terms of the pressure and the expectations. I guess the fact that he's going in there when they're such a mess maybe gives him a little bit more of a foundation to build upon, I suppose. A little bit more patience. But then this is Chelsea. Is there ever going to be patience? And the fact, obviously, he knows the Premier League inside out maybe gives him a benefit over the PSG job. And I think behind the scenes it'll be a little bit more straightforward than some aspects of life at PSG. But still, that's a big call from Poch. It is a big call. And look, he's been out of work now for a while, so I could absolutely understand the desire from him to just get back into work. And it looks like the Real Madrid job at the moment may not be coming up, and Ancelotti may be staying. So perhaps that was one of the other ones he was looking at. But yeah, I don't know where I'm at with it. I'll be honest. You can probably tell by the way I'm talking about it. There's a part of me that is surprised, would be surprised, if he went to, the club he loves, one of their biggest rivals. I would be surprised. As in, not saying it's not going to happen. I'd be surprised at his decision-making process in that. However, I also understand that work is work, and if the place you love have zero interest in bringing you back, and they sacked you, do your loyalties remain with them? Is football a business where you can have these loyalties and maybe think like a fan? Maybe they can't think like a fan in these scenarios. So, yeah, I'm fascinated to see which way it goes and what's gonna happen about it. But yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by it all. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think. If Mauricio Pochettino was to become the Chelsea manager, what would you make of that? Who would you be angry with? I do wonder whether in this current time and with all of the anger towards Levy and the board that has been growing, I do wonder whether we're at a stage where maybe he does get more of it than Poch would. There's also a part of me that thinks, will one day in the future Pochettino be yet another ex-Chelsea manager that Spurs appoint? You can't rule it out. You can't. Yeah. Oof. God, if you asked me, 4 or 5 years ago, would I be talking about Pochettino as potential Chelsea manager? I don't think I would have ever thought that was going to be the case. But here we are. Here we are. Maybe we shall see. I mean, their shortlist was quite interesting, but certainly shortlist seems to be getting shorter by the day. Obviously, Luis Enrique appears to be out of the running as well. Luis Enrique is one for me. I've got to be perfectly honest. You may have sensed this from my other videos anyway. Out of all the names, or a lot of the names linked with the Spurs job, and this is probably going to sound mad, bear in mind the silverware he won with Barcelona, he's probably the one that excites me the least. And that may well be proved to be completely daft in the future. He may well, who knows? He may end up being a Tottenham manager and is a wonderful success. But just for me, on a personal level, I just think I see it as yet another, if he were to join, be a Daniel Levy glamour appointment. Oh, look at the man over there that's won things elsewhere. Oh, and that's just feels like another one of those to me. It's a guy who he has had, I wouldn't say he's only had success at Barcelona with Messi and all of that. I do think, you look at his time at Celta Vigo, he did well, and there's been other elements in his other jobs, at times in a national job. Was it Roma as well? There's been elements, but obviously his success has pretty much all come at Barcelona despite that. Certainly in the silverware front, I think. I could be wrong. But it just doesn't excite me. I think the football would be very different. I think, you'd have a lot more possession football. Obviously, whether it be possession football with an end product is something we'd have to see. But yeah, for some reason, and I know it probably sounds mad, there's probably some people out there going, what are you talking about, Gold? The guy's won trophies, that's what Tottenham's needs. Bring him in, change the whole culture, change the philosophy and everything. But I don't know. There's a part of me that kind of, I think I'd like just almost like a reset. I think I'd like Spurs to go for a young project manager and trying to build something rather than just keep adding on these different layers. When sometimes they dig down and they find all these different layers of weird different things that happened over the centuries underneath the soil. That's kind of Spurs right now. It's just these weird different layers of different managers built on top of each other that have no real connection, no real identity as a group of layers. And yeah, I think that is where I'm at. I think I'd almost like to see Spurs just almost like scrubbed clean and start again. I've said it before, if you need to step back for a season to go 2 or 3 steps back in the future season, I think maybe they need to do that. Again, absolutely would be delighted to eat my words. It's not really eat my words, because I'm not saying Luis Enrique would be a failure or a bad thing. I'm just saying he doesn't quite excite me in the way a new project kind of would. And I think, from what I understand, I don't think he's the biggest fan of the media either. So we might have a tough time with him. I might have another Nuno on my hands, in different ways, of course. Yeah. And actually, there's also the Paratici angle to that as well, because from what I always said to you and I understood was that Luis Enrique and Sergio Conceição Porto were 2 big names for Paratici. Luis Enrique, he loved Luis Enrique Paratici. So does that change? With Paratici then being out the door, does it change that Luis Enrique maybe doesn't become such a top target for Tottenham as he would have been with Paratici leading the managerial hunt? There's a part of me, I still think Daniel Levy looks at him and goes, ooh, I still do. But we'll see. We'll see where that goes. I mean, for me, the more I read about him, I like the idea of Arne Slot. I do, at Feyenoord. I know, obviously, European-wise, it hasn't been the greatest week for him, but I do think he's a guy that he's certainly building something there. And I could be wrong, but I get the impression that a manager like Arne Slot, I don't want to be disrespectful at all to the Eredivisie and Feyenoord and all of that, but you would hope that coming to the Premier League and Tottenham would be a job that he would really relish and be excited about and might want to build it as a long-term legacy kind of career. And yeah, the more I read about him, I do find him very interesting. I can see parallels to what they did with Poch if they were to bring him in. There, of course, would be an element of, are they just trying to make up for the fact that they absolutely messed up not getting Erik ten Hag, kind of leaving him hanging and not appointing him when he wanted to come to Spurs? You know, are they just dipping back for the next big thing in the Netherlands football arena? There's definitely a side to that, but I do like the sound of him. Of course, I like De Zerbi. I think he's a bit of a crazy character, and I don't know how well he'd go down behind the scenes. And like I've said a million times, I don't get the impression from him at all that he's desperate to move to Spurs. From certainly the people around him. So, but I do like the idea of him as a Spurs manager. I like the idea of Vincent Kompany, although very much I think he's probably one of the biggest gambles out there in that regard. Although sounds like he's on the Chelsea shortlist as well. I mean, what I'm just saying, I'm just using these as names as people that I would be quite excited about to see what they would do with Spurs. Even Graham Potter. You know, Guesty keeps telling me this. Guesty, if you're not aware, Rob Guest, we do the podcast together, Golden Guest Talk Tottenham. Guesty keeps saying this. Anyone in 2021 would have taken Graham Potter in a heartbeat. You know, and why should that change just because his Chelsea experience at a very different club was a difficult one for him? And I get him on that. I don't think the aesthetic would be great. I don't think it would look great that Spurs had turned to another Chelsea manager and one who failed, I guess, at Chelsea. But I still think at a club like Spurs, he could do something with it. Imagine the way they were playing under him, but with Harry Kane at the top of that and Sonny at the top of that. I do think he would be absolutely fine in the role. And then, you know, even looking elsewhere, like Thomas Frank, you've heard me say this before. When I sat in his press conferences after Spurs played Brentford, I've been absolutely fascinated with the way he talks. He's so interesting. His tactical mind is clearly, he's a very intelligent guy. And Brentford, you know, he's done very well with it. Can he translate that to Tottenham? Even there's an old Spurs boy doing very well in the Championship. I know there's some people going, how dare you can't dip down into the Championship. Even though, you know, Vincent Kompany is exactly that right now. But Michael Carrick's doing very well. Michael Carrick at Middlesbrough is doing a fantastic job if you look at where they've come from. He's going to be a very good coach. It may be that it's all far too early for Michael Carrick. But, you know, definitely one to keep an eye on. He's done a terrific, terrific job. But I'm just using them as examples of, you know, Ruben Amorim, chuck him in there as well, of young, up-and-coming managers that I think, I said this before, I just want someone to come in and not see Spurs as a stepping stone, not see it doing them as a favour, doing Spurs a favour if they came in. I would love someone to come in because they were really proud to become Tottenham Hotspur manager and want to build them in their own image in this new style of an exciting, open, attractive way of, so maybe not open, but an attractive, entertaining, attacking style of football. I would love to see that. I would. You know. But we shall see. We shall see what life brings us. You know, it doesn't always bode well when it's Tottenham Hotspur. And press conference was a perfect example. I just couldn't believe it. I rocked up at Hotspur Way, and the very nice lady behind the desk, as I was kind of signing in, we get these little wristbands so that we can go into the press conference room. And she said to me, "Did you get the email about the power cut?" I was like, no email actually ever arrived. Presumably it was sent just before the power went down. But I kind of looked around and I was like, oh yeah, like everything was completely dark other than the window natural light. And the press conference room, it has one big window at the far end, but the rest of the room is actually quite dark. So they ended up having to bring in these kind of battery-powered lights just to light up Stellini a bit. He looked a bit tanned. I know they've had a couple of days off early in the week. I wonder whether he went back to Italy or it looked like somewhere maybe to be a bit hotter right now. He definitely had a little bit of a tan to him, unless it was just that I was seeing him in the dark. But it was made for a very surreal atmosphere. And we were just laughing as journalists because a lot of us obviously have, like the fans, are just like bewildered by everything that goes on at that club. And then just to have a power cut, just like before the press conference was about to start, just it just summed up everything, didn't it? And it kind of sparked all the jokes, as Levy put the money in the meter and all this sort of stuff. As Paratici, did he, take one of the take one of the fuses out of the box before he left, and all this sort of stuff. Great fun was had by all. But yeah, press conference. So, where do we start with this? Let's see. I'm going to look through my transcript from it all, because there was a lot asked of Stellini. I missed last week's one, so I was kind of back in the game, as it were. And yeah, he made a bit of a cheesy one to start off with. He was asked about the power being off and had it affected the first team. He said, "It's okay, we could train, but it's important to have our power, not electric power." See what you did there, Christian? Very good. And then he even said, I don't know whether he meant it or not, but he kept slipping in little words like, in the next one, we had 1 week to recharge after the game. And later on, he talked about switches and switching. Maybe he's just thought, how many puns can I get into my thing about power and stuff like that? He was asked about Paratici and whether his departure had impacted preparation. He said, no, this has not affected preparations because Fabio was far from here for a couple of weeks, so nothing changes in this situation. But humanly, we're very close to Fabio, all of us. It was a tough period for him, and now the final result is very sad for everyone, for him and his family. Humanly, we're very close to him. The club made a statement, and this is all that I can say. But it kind of wasn't, because we kept asking about it. Have you been in touch with him? Yes. How is he? It's a tough moment, so I want to be close humanly. Likes the word human and humanly. All my heart is with him, but it's a tough moment, so you can understand this period is tough. And yeah, he kept essentially saying that it hadn't affected the players or anyone there because he hadn't been around in recent weeks anyway, Paratici. Injury news, some good news. Oh, finally, some good news. Ben Davies. Ben Davies back in training, doing part training and some of his own. And he said, it's interesting, in the press conference he said, in part of training only, so maybe not ready to play a match, but we're close to recovering Ben. But then Spurs put out some team news, and that was slightly different from what he said to Spurs Play. He said, Ben is very close to coming back. Tomorrow we'll see if he can train with us in full training for first time. It's been a long time, so maybe this is the best news we have, but we're happy to have him back training with us. When he was asked would he be ready to play Newcastle, he said, we don't know, it's a risk, so we have to decide tomorrow, but it's important Ben is back for the next week. So that's one thing, because that's big on two levels. It's big on the fact that just have another body fit and, get them off the massive injury list. But what it's also big is all of those fans calling for a back four, suddenly you have a fullback on the left-hand side who's able to play in a back four. So if you want to see that formation change, Ben Davies is very much pivotal to bringing that, because you can't have Ivan Perisic as a left back, doesn't work. Tanganga and Longley maybe, but that's very much shoving people into a role that is not their role. Ben Davies is your best option for that role. So yeah, so that's a good thing. What else we got? Oh, I asked about Clement Longley because he didn't mention Clement Longley in the injury news. That was one of my questions. I said, how is he? Obviously came off against Bournemouth. And he said, so-and-so, we're trying to have Longley 100%. He trains with us, but he's not 100%, but we're confident Longley tomorrow can train for the full session. In this moment, it is only a part, but from tomorrow, we're confident he is good. So I actually asked him, what's his injury? Because it looked to us like he pulled up suddenly with a muscle injury, but it wasn't what it was. He said it was an inflammation under his foot. It's painful, not a problem that can become bigger, but we have to manage it. And as a little extra, he did again speak to Spurs Play, where he said, Clement is good. He has to manage the inflammation, but he is in training. Maybe sometimes he has to manage the volume of the training, but we can manage that and be confident that Clement is playing. We're trying to... and he's going back into his press conference thing. Yeah, so that's it. They're confident that he's going to play. That's, again, massive because of the balance element. The Spurs have said this. When we're talking about the Bournemouth game, as soon as Clement Longley went off, they lost all balance. Romero shifted to right, Sanchez came on, and obviously everything went a bit to pot. As I think it was George Sessions from PA pointed out, sorry, I've got something in my eye there. It's not a good sign that both, I know you can have varying degrees of injuries, but for Ryan Sessegnon to have yet another hamstring injury that obviously suffered way before Ben Davies' one. For Ben Davies to come back with his hamstring injury beforehand, it's not a good sign. It's not. And, there was certainly Ryan Sessegnon had been working outside. So, yeah, interesting one that there's still no kind of news on him in terms of coming back soon. Hopefully, they're just being cautious with him because obviously you don't want another repeat of what happened. Speaking of Davinson Sanchez, they were my other questions. I asked Stellini, have you spoken to him this week? Because obviously, as a coach, you need to mentally get Sanchez back into the frame of mind after what happened to him. And he said, yes, I spoke with Patron. That's obviously what they call him. I think it stands for the boss, isn't it? I think. We had a good conversation. Of course, it is tough for a player to come in and then come out of the pitch. It's the type of thing that also happened to me when I was playing. It is not the best moment you can live, but the type of thing that has to give you a reaction, a good reaction. I asked him to have a good reaction, to train well and to do his best. He's a good guy. He understood the moment during the last game, so he accepted the situation. So I asked him, have you ever seen a player being booed by his own fans after making a mistake? Every touch being booed. And he said, no, it's very rare, but I think if it happened to some players, it's important your reaction to have the fans back with you. I want to help him have this situation back for him. We have to work together to reach this. I think he was asked about whether he would play Davinson later. Let's have a look. That was it. He was asked whether he'd like the fans to show that little bit kind of extra support for him, which, do you know what? I think because of the outrage from, I don't know, it's half, I don't know, but the outrage from some fans towards the booing from other fans, I actually think that had they been playing at home, I think weirdly Davinson Sanchez's name probably would have got quite a big cheer, and I think people would look to make up for it. It'd be interesting to see what the away fans do at St James's Park, but I genuinely think that might be the case. I could be being utterly deluded, but I just feel like the fans who did not like that would want to make up for it by, I guess, supporters supporting him. He was essentially asked, I think it was by George from PA, would he like to see that? He said, yeah, I hope this happens because players are, before being players, they are men. Ironically, I think that's the one point he means human. They need the opportunity to react, the opportunity to do better, the opportunity to do their best. The fans are an important part of this. Yeah, we'll see. I think it's quite probably a good thing for Davinson Sanchez that Clement Longley being fit means he's not thrust into the start. And this is the thing with the Davinson Sanchez stuff. Yes, I know he does have a mistake a game in him, but also this is a player who has not started a Premier League match for 6 months, and he was thrown into that game, and people kind of expecting him to just be absolutely on point. And I've heard some people saying, oh, look, the boos weren't for Sanchez, they were for the situation, they were for the club, the board, whatever. But if you're booing one player, there's only one person that is going to feel those boos, and that is the player. It's all very well trying to, I think, say that, oh, well, my boos were towards Daniel Levy, but they weren't if you're booing Davinson Sanchez's every touch. Doesn't work like that. Stellini was also asked, who do you report into now that Fabio Paratici has gone? And he said, Greta Steinson, Daniel Levy and Andy, meaning Andy Scolding. We have people who worked around Fabio that now take his responsibility. We have in every department people that can support us. He was also asked whether Paratici, obviously him being close to Paratici, with Paratici going, if the results continue in a downward spiral, does that have an impact on whether Stellini might not last until the end of the season? And he said, it is not a question for me. We are here. I don't think so, but it's not a question for me. But then I guess Antonio Conte was asked, wasn't he? Do you think you might go before the end of the season? I'm pretty sure he said something similar. I think so, which is not a good thing. I'm just scanning very quickly through the press conference to see if there's anything else that really leapt out. There's a Harry Kane statue thing, but I want to save that because we're going to talk about the stuff that Daniel Levy said. And that kind of ties into that, so I'll hold on that one. No, the rest was all a bit of the usual, a bit of the we must play well, we must focus, we must have a reaction, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, interesting press conference, especially the fact that we almost had to do it by candlelight. There's a little bit more to come that will come out at 10:30 tonight about a few subjects. Do you know what? I was thinking this today. Out of all of the people that look likely that will head out of Spurs this season, I think the one I've probably will miss is Christian Stellini. And I know there's a lot of people going, no, he's Conte in disguise. But I'm talking, in his own words, on a human level. Obviously, Conte was really interesting. Didn't have any issues with him whatsoever. Gave me very good answers to all my questions whenever I asked him, pretty much. Didn't have anything to do with Fabio Paratici, despite my constant attempts to try and get an interview with him. It was never, ever taken up. So I had no personal connection with him whatsoever. I don't even think I got a hello from him if I ever saw him in passing. Not that that's the be all and end all. But I feel like with Christian Stellini, look, I know he had his ban in the past for the when he got caught up in the whole massive match fixing scandal, which Conte was caught up in. Loads of people were caught up in back in Italy, and was it more than 10 years ago? But he comes across as just a good guy, decent guy, trying to do his best. And he is genuinely, what I was saying about the new managers that I'd like to see, or new manager, he is genuinely so proud that he is the Tottenham Hotspur, head coach. It is actually, that might have been something he said. Let me have a look. Maybe. Oh, I think it was here somewhere. Oh, here we are. Are you enjoying being the coach? He said, yes, I'm enjoying this, of course. And he kind of laughed. He said, how many people would like to be here? I think it is a dream. So I'm enjoying it, of course. I'm trying to do my best. And that's just always the sense I've got from him. He's a guy trying to do his best. He really loves the fact that he's, at the club and he's been given this big chance. And look, it hasn't been convincing yet. It hasn't worked thus far. Of course, absolutely, fingers crossed it all turns around and this is the week from heaven after weeks from hell at Spurs. But just as a person, I was thinking that today. I've said hello to Gianni Vio. I don't think I've spoken to anyone else. So for me, on a personal level, yeah, I do have a little bit of a connection with Stellini, and I do want to see him do well, of course. And I will be sad to see him go. I will. And I think if you ask any journalist at Spurs, I think it's similar. He's always, apart from injury news, been very forthright with us. And you can see a man trying to step up into a big role that, ultimately may be too big for him. We'll see how the season pans out. But he's a guy that he is certainly trying to give it his all, and I think you can kind of appreciate that when you talk to him, excuse me, and see him in person. So there you go. Right, Daniel Levy. Ooh, Daniel Levy. Wow. Daniel Levy. Ooh. So, the task that I was set, my challenge on Thursday. So Daniel Levy did a Q&A session. He did it as part of the oh my goodness, the name's gone out of my head. The is it London Academy of Excellence it's based within Lily-White House, the Spurs headquarters, just next to the stadium. It's his fantastic college that was set up. The club had a big part in kind of getting it all off the ground, and it was trying to improve the education in the area. So some of those students have since gone on to study at Cambridge. Daniel Levy studied at Cambridge, and so he was offered to go back to his Cambridge Student Union and do a Q&A, mainly with the goal of obviously meeting some of these students that have come through the London Academy of Excellence. I absolutely hope I'm not butchering that. Let me just have a look. I don't want to get that wrong. London Academy of Excellence. One of those There's one in Stratford. Am I calling it the wrong one there? Let me have a look. Sorry, I know this is unprofessional. It is London Academy of Excellence. So I'm right. It's one of the things, they do really great work and you don't want to give them the wrong name. So Daniel Levy went along and he did this very long Q&A with the Cambridge Student Union, and I've seen some people kind of criticising the questions and stuff, expecting them to be like seasoned kind of journalists absolutely going for Levy's throat. Do you know what? I was actually really impressed with a lot of the questions. They didn't give him an easy ride, and there were some questions in there that were the kind of ones that I think a lot of journalists would have asked. The only thing I would say about it is that had we been in that audience, we probably would have followed up on some of the answers to try and delve a bit deeper into them. And that was the only thing they weren't able to do so much. But, there were some Spurs fans in there. They asked some really good, comments, questions about various aspects of Tottenham that have gone wrong over the years. There's ticket price questions. There's some good stuff in there. So I don't think that's fair myself to say that this group of students didn't do a really good job of what they had. But he spoke for 42 minutes. It was more we've heard of Daniel Levy than probably the collective last 10 years put together, I'll be honest with you. Which is interesting, eye-opening, not in a good way in some ways, predictable in some other ways, but also just a damning indictment of we're having to listen to the person who makes these big decisions that unfortunately are going wrong more often than not when it comes to on-pitch matters. We're having to glean anything we can from a talk he did at the student union at his old university on March the 14th. It only so happens that the uni put it out as a YouTube video on Thursday morning or Wednesday night, I think it was, that we're even aware it happened. So my task on Thursday morning, which was not fun, and was to transcribe those 42 minutes. So, of course, you're not transcribing it at the natural speed. You're stopping, you're starting. So more than 3.5 hours of my Thursday was spent listening to Daniel Levy talking over and over and over again. And the bulk of it is Daniel Levy talking. I honestly, later that night, in my nightmares, I was hearing Daniel Levy's voice because I was so used to hearing it over and over and over again. So the takeaways from it, massively for me, was that need to communicate. You've heard me say it before. I don't understand it. And the irony is yes, he's a publicity shy man that doesn't like talking. But he's actually, when you listen to him, especially in an event like this, he's very confident in his talking. He doesn't get tripped up. He doesn't worry about what he's going to say. He's very, I don't know whether he's trained himself or he's been trained in how to say things, but he very much, I feel like, he's quite a confident man in the way he gets his ideas across and his beliefs. He also is very bullish. He's very firmly believes in the things he's saying, rightly or wrongly. So for me, it doesn't add up. I don't understand why he doesn't talk more. Just look, obviously I want to talk to the media. I would love to sit down and absolutely throw a hell of a lot of questions at him. And perhaps the way that I am quite outspoken about the mistakes he's made, despite some people don't think I am, which is funny to me, because especially when you read my stuff or listen to these videos, you know all the things I say. So, but maybe the fact that I say that maybe means I'm not likely to ever get that access. I don't know. Maybe I've burned that chance. Maybe they would need someone who is more, or the club would pick someone who is more, maybe more that I don't want to say they can control, because I wouldn't say any journalist can be controlled, but maybe someone they think would be more sympathetic to their cause. I don't know. But from what I understand, he did a sit down. I think I might have said this before. Sorry if I'm repeating myself. He did a sit down. I think it may have been on a pre-season tour once, more than a decade ago, with a group of journalists, I think maybe mainly national journalists, and it didn't go well in the aftermath. He felt that he was misquoted, things were taken out of context and splashed across the headlines. And I'm pretty certain, from what I understand, that is the reason that certainly the media barely ever get him now. I think I can remember having a press conference with him for the AIA sponsorship renewal out in Shanghai. But even that, there wasn't a lot of time to that or scope for the questions. There was one about the stadium, which was similar, just before that was about to open. I'm trying to remember if there's any others I can think of. I don't think so. But look, even media aside, just do more stuff where he's doing a Q&A, even if it is club stuff. Just explain your decisions. Whether they're right or wrong, it gives people a little bit more context to what's being said, and it maybe separates his caricature of Daniel Levy from the actual person that is making these decisions. People may still disagree with the reasoning behind the decisions, but at least they know why the decisions are made. You know, anyone that's watched my stuff or read my stuff knows it's a massive bugbear of mine that he is one of the least visible people in power. And it would be fine if there were other people at the club that made up that shortfall. Paratici was meant to be that man. Did he ever? I think he did. He'd do these kind of the odd transfer window rap things that he would do, especially the last one, which was the worst timed interview ever in the history of the world, maybe. And maybe Scott Munn will be that man. He'll come in, and you'll get that sort of access to him, and we'll get that sort of access to him. So, yeah. But for me, it was just a massive thing of and I could see Spurs fans saying, and understandably so, why don't we get this? Why don't we get this Q&A? Why don't, and I would agree with this, why don't Spurs once a year have a Q&A session with season ticket holders with Daniel Levy? I remember there was something with Daniel Levy and Mauricio Pochettino doing one, because I remember, didn't Poch hug that? Oh, he was a lovely guy, actually. I think I met him. Really nice guy that asked for a hug from Poch. I feel like I met him at the Spurs stadium. But that was not the main point I was talking about. It was more the fact that, but even then, maybe that was done at a time when things were going well. And he had Poch by his side, who was kind of loved at that time as well. For me, it would be braver and more of a... I think it would be a good thing for showing his character if he, once a year, did a Q&A session with season ticket holders and actually not televise it, but screen it, put it on Spurs Play, whatever they've got to do, just so other fans can see things. That's just the problem. When he doesn't talk, he comes across, Daniel Levy, as this man looking down from his tower on the unruly mob below with their pitchforks and torches, just in disbelief. What do they know? He may not be like that. He might be like that, but he may not. But we never know. But hey, this was a chance to actually hear from him on a range of matters. The one thing, I'm going to start with a critical thing I felt from it, was that there was no sense of accountability for me. That was what I took from it. There was a lot of talking, a lot of explanation of things, but never at one point did I feel that Daniel Levy felt he was responsible for any of the things that had not gone right at Tottenham in his 22 years or so of being the chairman. That was what I got from it. I never sensed at any point that he believed any of the problems that he was speaking about had came from any decisions he made. And that's a big thing. That's a huge thing for people to be able to understand their mistakes and learn from them, grow from them. And maybe that's why Spurs on the pitch have never grown, because they've never learned from their mistakes. They've kept making the same ones over and over again. And maybe that is why Pochettino has not had his phone ring from Spurs, because they have not acknowledged that was a mistake 4 years ago, when clearly the 4 years after have kind of proved that it had to have been. So let's have a look. What have we got? The early stuff was very much about his... talking about being a Spurs fan when he was a kid. It was all very cliched about having a rosette and a hot dog and rattles. It sounds like he went in the 1960s. Well, saying that, was he born in the 60s? Maybe it was the 60s, actually. So that could be doing disservice there, or maybe early 70s. Wait a minute, 60, what is he, 60 something now? 62 maybe? Yeah, it would have been, maybe 60s, 70s. But yeah. Then it talks about his kind of life as a student and how he was told, his parents were told that he should leave school, he wasn't going to make it, knuckled down, became, what he is today. I want to get to the Spurs stuff rather than that. He was asked why, for a publicity-shy man who had no intention of becoming a chairman, is he now the longest-serving chairman in the Premier League? He said, firstly, as you know, I don't do interviews very often. It's only because I'm coming back to Cambridge that I agreed to do this, particularly when I got an email from Oxford. I thought I'd better come and do this. The answer is it's been an incredible journey. In the 22 years, Tottenham has progressed enormously in that time period. Not as much as a fan, and he pointed to himself, we would hope. However, the journey is not over, and we're still hoping that we get that trophy which we need. And then he made some stuff which is like, oh, don't say these sort of things. So he was asked him what his proudest achievement at the club would be. And he spoke about they had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with all 750 staff at Spurs got together. They had a big picture with lots of trophies up. And he said, it is about winning, but winning dependent on the moment in time you ask that question to various people means different things. So when we first came to Tottenham, winning was making sure we stayed in the Premier League. Then as time goes on and we got more successful, it was about getting into Europa League and then the Champions League. Obviously, the ultimate is to win the trophies. So that is clearly what we're trying to do. It's easier said than done. Am I happy that we haven't won more than one trophy in the last 15 years? Absolutely not. But I also think we've had some fantastic times. Being in the Champions League a number of times, despite the fact I feel sick that there's a club in North London that's a bit higher than us at the moment in time. It's a lot higher. A lot higher. If I look back in the last 5 years, we've also been higher than them. So that's what happens. Yeah. I didn't buy some of that. Interestingly, it says one trophy in the last 15 years. Just chopping off another 7-8 years of his chairmanship there for some reason. Look, he spoke about all the stuff they do in the community. To be fair, he was asked about it. It wasn't like he kind of offered that up himself, and they have. If you're going to take a stick to beat Daniel Levy with what he and the club have done in the area, a lot of the good things they've done is definitely not one thing you can beat them with. But I understand football fans, it's about the football and it's about what happens on the pitch. What else do we have? Admitted he was too hands-on, maybe. Some would say he was too hands-on in the building of the new stadium, but for him it was important that we created something truly special. Wasn't concerned about the long-term debt of the stadium. He says, and this always sounded a little bit condescending. Sometimes I think you've got to think about the way you say things. Debt isn't really a problem. Anyone that understands finance, providing you can match long-term income streams to long-term debt, and it's financed properly, is not a problem. The fact that our debt is basically a 30-year mortgage and it's very low interest rate, no, it's not a problem. He was asked. There was a few financial questions. Obviously, there's people within the audience who are interested in the financial side of stuff, and him being a former investment banker, that was the kind of stuff they were interested in. So they were asked about how it has gone from being valued at 100 million or just over when he took it over. It's now a £2 billion company. He was asked, what do you attribute this financial success to? He said, when you're building a club and you're building long-term value, I would say there's a number of ingredients. One is profitability. Some clubs are valued at a lot of money that aren't profitable, so revenue becomes important. I wonder who he's talking about there. Physical assets, success on the pitch. There's no one aspect. You need them all to come together. So he was asked about being described as being more painful to deal with than a hip replacement. How would you describe your negotiating style? He said, firstly, that comment was from Alex Ferguson, who remains a friend. All I was doing was protecting the interests of my club. It shouldn't be seen as a negative, the fact that I want to maximise the price for the benefit of the club because all the money goes back into reinvesting. And then he was asked, do you think you're more painful to deal with than a hip replacement? And he said, maybe, with a bit of a smirk. And actually, interesting, he was asked about a Giorgio Chiellini quote about when they lost to Juventus, it being the history of Tottenham losing. And And he said his answer to that, that was put to him. He said, well, it was a fair comment. He said, if you go back in history, Tottenham was a club that has a lot of history because it has won things. In recent times, it's not been where it needs to be. We're on a journey and we need to get better success on the pitch. But we have been in the Champions League a number of times and we almost got there, winning the ultimate, which would have been winning the Champions League. It's difficult. And I think I can understand a lot of fans. How do I put this? I don't think anyone that really dislikes Daniel Levy will have been massively swayed in a different direction. I think you might get a few people that think, okay, right, well, I understand that a little bit more. But I think stuff like that, when he's just talking about, isn't it great that we got in the Champions League? And again, no accountability. We're on a journey and we need to get better success on the pitch. But what's your part in that, Daniel Levy? What have you done to help that success on the pitch? He was asked about Harry Kane. Do you think Harry Kane can win a trophy at Spurs or does he need to move elsewhere? He can absolutely win a trophy at Spurs, but being a legend is also important. The fact that he's the top scorer for Tottenham Hotspur, he's making history. I hope one day there's a statue of Harry Kane outside our stadium. That goes forward to Stellini's press conference, where I said earlier, he was asked about that. He was asked, is there any banter with the players about there being a statue one day of him outside the stadium? Stellini looked absolutely nonplussed, had no idea what was being spoken about, clearly had not seen anything Daniel Levy had said, and he was just like, yeah. He was like, yeah, okay, I haven't read anything about this, but yeah, no, he's very good, Harry Kane. It was like, okay, fantastic. That was a complete waste of someone's question. He was asked about hiring and firing managers. How difficult has that been? I think as far as the manager is concerned, that when they come in to manage a football club, it's just part of the game. It's not personal. We're in the business of winning. And if they don't win enough games, then they know that their job is on the line. They're paid very well for that. So it's just how it is. It's not personal. All the managers that have left Tottenham, I'm either still in contact with or they come back to games. It's not personal. Big stuff in there when you think about it. We're in the business of winning. Ooh, Tottenham don't too much or don't enough. If they don't win enough games, they know their job is on the line. They're paid very well for that. Again, accountability. It's almost like it's the manager's fault every time. But who is hiring those managers? 99% of the time, Daniel Levy. What is he judged upon? Is he judged upon building a stadium or the good stuff he's done in regenerating the area? Or is he judged for what happens on that football pitch as the man who is at the top of the chain responsible for what happens on that football pitch? Yes, he's not directly responsible. He doesn't kick the ball. He doesn't pick the team. But he makes the decisions that affect who those players are and who that manager is each time. Let's be honest. There's this thing with Daniel Levy, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. He talks about the European structure and how in Europe there's every 2 years they have a manager, whereas in England there's this obsession with long-term managers. That's great if you pick a director of football and you keep a certain style of play like Brighton are doing, a great example right now, so that when the head coach changes, it doesn't matter because they have a style. Spurs have no style. They have no set way of playing. It is completely different from manager to manager. And I would say we're at a stage now where Spurs have almost had as many directors of footballs as they have managers. It's just some of the stuff that I do find a bit bewildering. He was asked about takeover stuff and recent reports. And is there any truth if a bid come in? Would he be tempted to sell the club, or ENIC would? He said, I answered this question in the way I've answered it for the past 22 years. ENIC owns approximately 87% of the club. We have 30,000 shareholders, and most of them are fans who own the shares. We have a duty to consider any proposal anyone wants to make. All I'd say is we are not in negotiations with anybody, nor have we been in recent months. All the stuff that has been in newspapers is completely untrue. It's not entirely. Obviously we all have our sources, and certainly discussions have been had. Whether Spurs initiated them is another thing, but certainly the topic of investing in the Spurs has definitely come up. Quite interesting they said not in recent months as well. You can read whatever you want into that as well. Then a lot of those questions I've just referred to were asked by the moderator, who was very well prepared, very well researched, and asked some good questions. Then it was open to the floor. And the very strange first question was, I have a very simple question. What do you think of Tottenham? Which everyone was a bit like, what? then he answered in a bit of a kind of a half jokey way, is a kind of like, what else am I supposed to say answer. He said, it's the greatest club in the world, which has not helped him in the time since, especially with, the next morning Paratici resigning, because obviously Spurs are far from the greatest club in the world right now. Sometimes we would like to believe they are. They as fans, they are, no doubt. Are they? But you know what I mean. You know what I mean. The dearest club in the world to the fans. Sometimes they are the dearest in ticket prices as well. But yeah, I saw Matt Law did a piece on Daniel Levy, which there wasn't a lot you could disagree with in it. It was talking about how a lot of the people that have worked alongside him at boardroom level have gone on to bigger and better things elsewhere. They've really flourished. And, you just wonder, what if they'd been at Spurs? What kind of state would Spurs be in? I think it was Darren Eales at Newcastle, Paul Barber at Brighton. And then it was talking about various other people, like managers that have gone on to do better things, like Mourinho's obviously having a good season now. And obviously there's players as well. Talking on Dembele is going to be a Serie A title winner. Brian Hill could win the Europa League now. Kevin Nkudu went off and won a title, for goodness sake. Either Spurs are cursed or just players just do better elsewhere. Although it was Dan Kilpatrick from The Standard made an interesting point. We were talking about it after the presser, and he's spot on. I do agree with him. It's actually quite difficult to see which managers have gone on to Spurs and done better afterwards. That's an interesting thing. Players, definitely. Managers, how many have gone on and done better things? You could say Mourinho right now is obviously feels like he's getting somewhere with Roma. Poch, you could argue, went to PSG and won trophies, but you could argue whether he had a better time of it success-wise, and it depends on, again, how you're measuring success. But I thought that was really interesting. I was trying to think about it, and yeah, a lot of the managers, that's a difficult one. Conte may well go back to Italy next season, may well win a title, so he may disprove that again. But elsewhere, yeah, it is a tough one. The other side to this argument, of course, and as Dan and I both agreed, maybe Spurs just break people. It could be that they absolutely break managers so often they can't go on and have any success elsewhere. Yeah, and this was an interesting one. Don't worry, I'm not going to read out the whole 42 minutes worth. Just certain little ones I think are quite interesting. How do you think that the average Spurs fan perceives you? He was asked, Daniel Levy. I'm not sure what an average Spurs fan is, but I would hope that they would perceive that I am always acting in the best interests of this club. I've given a large proportion of my working life to the club, and I think that the club today, hopefully they will perceive it to be in a better place than when I first got involved. It'd be interesting. I think if you took a straw poll, I'd be intrigued to see whether that many people actually do think that way or not. But yeah. I don't know about that myself, whether that would be the... Look, from when he took over, they have progressed. I don't think there's any way you can get around that. They're a bigger club. They are competing higher up the table more regularly. That's not to say that they've continued to progress at all. But yeah, you could maybe argue with that he's got a point in that respect that they have progressed since he took over. Has it been enough progress in 22, 23 years? That's another matter. It was asked about season tickets as well, which was a really interesting question about being that they're the most expensive, or some of the most expensive in the global game. How can you justify those, and are you alienating young people? His question with this, his answer, I wasn't entirely sold on it. He said, ticket pricing is a very complicated subject. Firstly, there's a conflict between ticket pricing, having the best stadium in the world, and also wanting to win on the pitch and pay high transfer fees and high salaries to get the best talent. In an ideal world, you'd like to have very low ticket pricing and to have the best players in the world and the best facilities. Somehow we have to find the right balance. The way we try to do it, firstly, we have concession pricing for a number of areas within the stadium for young adults and kids and the older generation. And when it comes to cup games, we try to price those very competitively. So this year, there have been a lot of games at £20 or £25 and concession pricing on top. So yeah, I get it. I get the fact that a club like Spurs, if you want to pay the salaries and the fees, a lot has to come out of the season tickets or the ticket prices, but it's also difficult to justify them being higher than other clubs that have had a lot more success. He would argue, well, their funds maybe come from elsewhere. So yeah, there was talking about fans going to away games and could there be a new system with loyalty points? Is there loopholes and maybe a partial ballot system? He said it's not something to look at, but he said it was a valid point. But he also said that, you could argue that if you've gone to more away games and you've built up those loyalty points, you should be a priority. But then also I can understand with new fans saying it's a bit of a closed shop then and you're never going to be able to go to an away game. What other good stuff was there? Or interesting stuff. Spoke a lot about the financial fair play rules again. I'm not going to go into all of that because we've spoken about that before. He's putting a lot of eggs in that basket, hoping that UEFA's new rules, which eventually I think it's 90% from next season of your turnover, you can spend on wages and transfer fees, and that will go down to 70% within a couple of years. Yeah, he's putting a lot of faith in a governing body that hasn't always been able to govern their own rules or make them stick anyway. He was asked about his way of negotiating and whether he was a special negotiator. He said, first, I don't consider myself to be a special negotiator or anything like that. As I said, I'm just acting in the best interest of my club. I think when it comes to a transfer, it depends on the balance of power. If you have a player that you really don't want to sell, then you have every right to say no, you own the registration. So it depends on the character of the player and whether you feel at the end you can keep the player, because we're operating in a team sport and it's very important that we keep the team together, so every circumstance is different. Can't help but wondering if he's talking about Harry Kane there. Yeah. What else we got? More financial fair play. It was quite interesting about the women's team, essentially saying that it needs to be changed. It's kind of similar to what he said in the financial statement, just saying that it's every Premier League team that has a women's club is losing money from their women's club because, in his words, ticket pricing is extremely low compared to the men. TV rights are very low. Sponsorship is very limited. So, things need to change. There need to be reviews made into that side of the game. Because obviously it's going to be very difficult for clubs to just continue with something that's losing them money. He spoke about the European style of managers only being every 2 years. Spoke about bringing in Mourinho and Conte. He asked about Mourinho and Conte, bringing them in as proven winners, but not being able to do that at Spurs. He said, I think whenever you appoint a coach, you're employing someone because you think they're going to make you win. You don't appoint them with the intention it's only going to be for 1 year or 2 years. You hope it will be long term. All I would make the observation is that in Europe, coaches are only appointed for 1 or 2 years, whereas in this country, we're obsessed with when someone is appointed that they only have a 2-year contract. How can you expect them to succeed if he's only got 2 years? He was asked about why he ever frustrated that he's someone that doesn't comment and talk a lot about things, because, and this was a Spurs fan that asked a question, because as a Spurs fan, that silence can be quite frustrating for us. He said, probably every day, the media often print stories that just aren't true. It's perceptions. An article gets printed. It's a story that then becomes a reality. But I've remained dignified and I just won't comment. Dignified. That's one way of putting it. The other way is maybe hiding away from explaining decisions that have gone wrong. But we all use different words. Anything else majorly interesting in there? Talk a lot about the brand. Or Pochettino's book. He was asked about, did he sanction it? It was this one fan that said that my friend messaged me today and said everything started to go wrong when Pochettino's book came out because he was a current manager, talking about current players and not saying always good things. So Levy was asked, did you sanction that? Did he discuss it with you? And he said, the answer is we did know about it. It was his choice to do it. Some people would say it was a good thing. Some people would say it was a bad thing, but it was his choice and we clearly didn't stop it. So read into that what you will. There was an interesting thing he was made about, kind of asked about what he needed to change at the club when he first came on board. And his answer was about being a fan and an investor. And you can't help but kind of feel it was also a pointed comment at fans and what they want him to do. So this was his comment. Firstly, when you're a fan and you're also an investor, I think you have a much more balanced view as to decisions that need to be taken in running the club. It's very easy, trust me, if you're emotionally connected but not financially connected, to make some very bad decisions or rash decisions. As much as we all love our club, they are also businesses where you have to make sure the income is sufficient to match the cost, and it's very easy to get into trouble. So I realised quite early on that if we wanted to make Tottenham successful, that it would be beneficial that if someone who was involved in running the club was not only a fan but also an investor. So that's interesting. Look, I agree to him to some extent. Some of the things that I see fans suggest should happen are clearly a bit daft, and they're stuff led by passion and emotion. But there's also stuff that I see that's mentioned that you kind of think, well, maybe if you weren't so focused on the investment financial side, actually that would be good stuff that you could think about and use. What else? Anything else massively worth it before I'd leave the Daniel Levy 3-hour job that he left me? Transfers. He was asked about transfer business. Yeah, should probably talk about that one. He was asked, like, Spurs are considered to be one of the most sensible clubs financially and how it does its transfer business. However, for many fans, they see it as coming at the expense of success on the pitch. Do you agree with this? Which is a good question. This is the answer. My starting point is I don't agree with it, because if you look at the amount of money Tottenham has spent on new players over the last 5 or 10 years and you compare it with certain other clubs in the Premier League, not only have we exceeded those clubs, but actually some of those clubs may well have been more successful than us on the pitch. There is not necessarily a direct link between the amount of money you spend and getting success on the pitch. Invariably, it is what you spend it on, and I could name, but I won't name, but we could all name in here a number of players Tottenham has bought that have not been successful and we've lost an awful lot of money on. Again, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. And at no point is there accountability or culpability that he has picked the people that are buying these players. You could argue they may have not done a due diligence on the players, but also has he done a due diligence on the people that are picking the players? I did feel there was a lot of this. I felt that some bits were interesting in giving fans perspective and context, and there were a lot of it I felt that also was very much "it's not me, Gov." He definitely, I feel he's become more bullish and kind of set in what he believes. Again, I don't really have anything to compare to that. So me saying he's bullish, maybe he's always been bullish like that. He was asked whether he, for everything he's done in the community, could there also be a Daniel Levy statue as well as that Harry Kane one? And he said, I don't need a statue, but what I would love to happen if I look back in time is the area of Tottenham is completely regenerated and the club is responsible and certainly a major contributing factor to that regeneration of the area. I think it's a wonderful thing to really change people's lives. That's great, and it's very much a deserving and well-meaning, fantastic thing for the club to have done and him to have also been a part of. But I think a lot of Spurs fans, if he was going to have a statue outside the stadium, would hope that his legacy would have also been creating a fantastic football club that had lots of success. It was quite interesting to see kind of where his head's at and where he sees his success as being in. So there you go. I think that's to be fair, is probably the main stuff. I think we properly delved into that. We got plenty out of that. So obviously, again, let me know. Because I don't think, especially with this Pochettino stuff, like I say, I'm intrigued to see how Levy comes out of this, especially the fact that they haven't gone to him at all, Pochettino. What else? I saw a new signing happening today in front of my eyes. I was writing up my post-press conference stuff just in the reception area. If you're not aware, the press conference room is attached to the side of the academy building, and also there's a lot of offices above as well. And I knew that this was going to happen today anyway, but I actually saw him in the flesh. A young man, 16-year-old, Callum Logan, with his family. It was really nice to watch, coming to sign for Tottenham Hotspur. I didn't get involved, didn't talk to anyone, just let them crack on with it while I kind of watched on like a voyeur from afar. So if you're not aware who he is, and obviously he's a youth player, 16-year-old, so the bulk of people are probably not going to be. 16-year-old left-sided centre-back, so people go, what? He's played up an age group for Ipswich's under-18s for much of this season, has done very well, very kind of highly rated young talent. Went with England under-16s to a tournament, I think, as well. I think he's been playing for England under-17s as well. Very talented young man. And yeah, signing for Tottenham Hotspur, which is fantastic. So it was lovely to see him, and he brought all his family, young sisters with him. It was really lovely to watch how excited they all were about kind of being part of Tottenham Hotspur, a Premier League club. A young lad at Ipswich. So that was lovely to see. So that happened. Not often, as a journalist, you get to sit there and see a transfer kind of happening. Andy Scolding came down to meet them all, and I think he looked across at me as if to go like, "Oh God, Gold's there." He may not even be aware of what I look like, so it might not have been. But yeah, so that was interesting for him. Interesting again, saying. Will Lancashire's turned 18. I understand his pro deal, he's now signed that. So that's great for him. I think the club I saw announced Luca Gunter as well has signed a new deal. So that's fantastic. Goalkeeper. So a couple of kind of little youth moves. And obviously, how can I forget the under-17s in the week as well. Massive kind of night for them in the Premier League Cup final. Fantastic. 5-1 in the end. Nottingham Forest kind of lost their head a bit, but Spurs were playing well. Spurs were already, I'm trying to remember if they were 2-1 up after the first red card or before it. But Forest got one red card. They got another red card in the second half. And then, Spurs ran riot after that. It was, I watched the bulk of the second half on Spurs play. I wasn't around for the first half, but I watched the bulk of the second half. Absolutely fantastic for them. Mikey Moore was very good. He played very well. Iro as well got a couple of goals. Tyrese Hall got one as well. I'm trying to think. I feel like I'm missing someone else. Wait a minute. No, that might be it. But Mikey Moore. Yeah. Actually, a lot of them. There's a lot of talents in that team. Very young players. I often see people kind of doing down the academy because the under-21s have had a tough year because of various things, injuries and the lack of availability of some of their players. And I think people have kind of just seen that as a feeding down to, it hasn't. The academy, under-17s, that was superb. They've had a brilliant thing. And it's trophy, silverware for Tottenham. And the under-18s are now... Sorry, Jamie Donnelly. He played very well as well. Should almost forgot to mention him. And he'll be involved again for the under-18s in their cup final that's coming up. I think is that next month? Certainly in a couple of weeks' time. I guess it is next month soon. So yeah, the young sides are doing well. And now it's just about nurturing them and bringing them along and hopefully making them, making them Tottenham stars of the future. So yeah, no, it's good stuff with the youth team, and they're doing a terrific job. A lot of the young coaches down there, young coaches of the young teams, are doing a great job. Honestly, hopefully, if I want to maybe wait until they've had the under-18s final as well, and then I think we'll do a proper deep dive into those young players and who are the real ones to watch out for. The coaches involved as well. Obviously, they've done a fantastic job, and we'll properly dive into that. Kind of almost, I want to give them a proper big chunk of one of these to themselves, and hopefully people are interested in that sort of thing. It's not just about the first team, which is a good thing probably right now as well. So yeah. Newcastle this weekend. I'm making the trek up there. I've got a very early train to head up there. So, yeah, please do say hello if you're on the journey as well. It's a long one. I did a podcast for one of our reporters that covers Newcastle today, and they were saying that apparently the fans at St James's Park have all been told they want them to be at their loudest because this is such a huge game. Essentially, if they win it, they're very much putting themselves kind of away from the pack in the top four. Same for Spurs. If they lose it, they're probably out of the race. I'd say not mathematically, but it would be very, very difficult after that. And I said to them, my fear is the noise. Spurs, every time there's been a noisy stadium this year, have crumbled pretty much. So we need a much, much different performance. Intrigued to see who we see. I'd imagine it'll be mostly the same lineup. Maybe Danjuma sneaks in there, scored a goal, played half an hour. It seemed mad not to give him a chance now as a rarity, a confident player at Tottenham right now. Personally, though, it's a difficult one because I'm then kind of ruling him out of my lineup. I would kind of like to see Spurs match him 3 in the middle because that's how Newcastle will go. I would kind of like to see maybe Sarr, Skip and Højbjerg together. I know you're losing some creativity, but I think in a game where there's going to be a lot of battles in that midfield, it could be where it's won or lost. And we know what Spurs are like. Sometimes when they play 2 against 3 in that midfield, you've really got to take advantage elsewhere where the extra numbers are, and they don't always do that. So, yeah, big game coming up. I'm intrigued to see, like I say, the fallout of what happens around Pochettino and how fans take this. If he does, he may not become the manager, but it's certainly of Chelsea, but it certainly looks to be one of the leading candidates, if not the leading candidate now. It's going to be difficult to watch if it does happen. Like I say, let me know in the comments below. Would you be unhappy with Pochettino or unhappy with Levy or unhappy with both? Or you just don't really care? There may be people that fall into all of those camps. Right, I'm going to head off there. I must admit, I thought this was going to be a shorter one, but I don't know why. When there's the amount of stuff I was going to have to talk about. But yeah, there you go. Little bonus one in the week for anyone that did want it or need it. Right, I'm going to head off now. Try and enjoy a day off tomorrow and hope Spurs don't ruin it with something else mad happening at the club. And then going to make my way up to Newcastle and hope that Spurs surprise us all with something that turns the season around in these final 8 games or so. We'll see. Right, I'm going to head off now. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.